Good evening, everybody. I'm calling this meeting of the Substandard Living Conditions Committee to order. It is 7:03 p.m. Typically, Alderman Harriet Gathright is our vice chair or does our clerking responsibilities. She is not able to attend at this time. And then our vice chair, Alderman Jetty, is up at the planning board due to a double conflict. So I asked Alderman Jan Schmidt to cover, and she graciously agreed. On the first item of our agenda, let's just do a roll call. Do you have the list?
I certainly do.
Okay.
Alderman Jetty is at the Planning Board. Alderman at-large Brandon Laws. Here. Alderman Jan Schmidt, of course, is here, and Alderman Harriet Gathright is not present.
Also joining us is Alderman at-large Mike O'Brien, and then Ward 3 Alderman Patricia Klee, and then additional representatives from Pennachuck Water Company. So to begin with, let's open up public comment. Any members of the public wishing to make public comment, you can step right up to the microphone here. Just make sure you give your name and your address clearly so that when we do the transcription, we can say who the speaker is. If anybody's interested in making comment, feel free to step up. Okay.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Dimitrios Mena. My address is 29 Milk Street in Nashua, not far from here. My wife and I invested in a retirement home as we're planning to retire and bought it on Milk Street, happy with the home structure. But as soon as we moved back in May, this last May, we discovered that there was brown water coming out of the faucets. Not to be alarmed, we went ahead and got a water company to evaluate the water, and they told us that there were all these minerals and stuff in it. And the fact that our eyes turned red when we took showers and so on became an issue. So we've been living off buying lots and lots of bottles of spring water everywhere. We spend almost $80, $60, $80 a month buying bottles. We were very alarmed. We didn't know what to do. We were thinking of buying a big system to filter all the water in. That will cost like $2,500. But then, luckily enough, I was at CVS the other day and saw the newspaper, the local paper, and it said, water problem in Nashua, brown water. So here I am at this meeting, hopefully to take away some action item that will let us feel like this is going to be remedied. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anybody else who'd like to make public comment?
Hi, my name is Laura Palmer, 160 Concord Street here in Nashua. I would just like to say I moved to that address late summer of last year. Did notice some problems strictly with the hot water at that time, not consistently. They did slowly progress over time. Once I brought them to the attention of the appropriate people within the property management. They did make changes to resolve the issues. I also involved Alderman Klee, who's worked extremely hard and continues to for everyone in our community, and I thank you so much for that on many levels. I'm happy to report that at least in my specific unit where I live, I am no longer, knock on wood, experiencing brown water. I've since had my water tested from a private source, and all the tests came back passed perfectly. So that's all I have to say.
We're very, very happy to hear that.
Thank you.
Very happy.
Is there any further public comment?
Hi, good evening. My name's Al Arena. I'm the property manager for 160 Concord Street. And the last several years, we've spent quite a bit of time and effort trying to improve conditions like Laura just said. We've through the years, we've installed filtration systems in all the buildings, and we frequently change the filters. We've been working with Pennachuck, and they've been very helpful with us. We installed a pumping, a flushing out system before the meter with their permission and their cooperation. That's helped. We've also changed many of the plumbing fixtures in the buildings. flushing out water systems. We've changed pumps, hot water tanks. And we do believe most of the issues are resolved. The one issue we've had recently, and we don't get too many complaints, but once in a while, and anytime we hear of something, we take it seriously, of course. Recently, there was an issue with the water pressure on the other building, and Penachuk recently came in, took out parts before our meter, and the problem seems to be terrific. So we're trying to do what we can, and Penachuk has been very helpful, and with their cooperation, I think we've resolved most of the issues. Just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Any further public comment? Please step up to the mic just so that it gets recorded.
Okay.
Yeah, and Tommy, the mic can adjust down.
Oh, yeah, and feel free to adjust it down if you want to.
Yes, thank you,
A
Alderman.
little bit short. Yeah, we've been having an issue at our home with brown water. It's in our toilet, it's in our sink. I'm not quite sure how to handle the situation, and
May I ask what could you state your name and your address?
Francis Michaud, 70 Cox Street in Nashua. And it's intermittent. It will come and go, but right now our toilet is, the water in the toilet is brown. And it also seems to be affecting the plumbing underneath our sink in the bathroom as well. And I just didn't know how we should handle the situation at this point.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments. We
Okay.
appreciate it. Just to clarify some of the role of the Substandard Living Conditions Committee, it was initially formed in order to address reports of substandard living conditions in the community. There was a need for legislation at that time to kind of give the code enforcement and health departments a little more ability to intervene with landlords that were repeatedly refusing to upgrade or update or comply with their requests. So there was a legislative action when this committee was originally conceived. More recently, what we've been trying to do is explore common issues that are experienced by both tenants and landlords, and talk about, what are the strategies, what are the solutions, and what are the resources. Ma'am, you don't have to stand. We're going to talk forever here, so I mean, it's a bunch of politicians. So that's the purpose of the committee, is not to finger point or blame or take the side of the landlord over the tenant, or the tenant over the landlord, or troubleshoot our own city departments. It's to raise awareness of how all three cooperate together and what resources are available, because I mean, what's often the case is if people know where to go and what steps to take, they don't get frustrated, they don't escalate, and they're able to focus more on solving solutions. So that's kind of what we're all here for. So at this time, I think I'd like to start by having Penachuk come up and maybe give a presentation on common issues with water and water treatment.
So is it okay if I basically stay right here?
Yeah, so our audio-visual people should be focusing their camera on you right now, so I would just stay right there so they're not trying to track or
All right.
anything.
Well, again, thank you for everybody who's come tonight. And what I wanted to give is
You should be sure to give your name
Okay.
also so that when they transcribe, they're getting it.
Thank
like
you.
at the
My
beginning.
name is Don Ware. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Penachuk Waterworks, and with me is Bernie Russo. Bernie is our Vice President of the Water Service Company, but also operated our water treatment plant for how many years? For 23 years. So, we wanted to talk about, first of all, where does colored water come from? And there are solutions. There are things that can be done. And most importantly, as we get to the end of this, we do want to hear from people, and we want to work with people to help, develop the solutions. So where does colored water come from in a typical New England distribution system? There are two sources. There's sources that come from within the piping that leaves the treatment plant and goes to your houses. The piping underground is primarily a combination of iron pipe. Prior to 1937, that pipe was not lined with cement. And iron in the presence of water creates rust. The main that your service is tapped off of is a 16-inch main that was installed in 1881. That water main has got a buildup of that. Now, that is typically, believe it or not, a very stable iron, but as flows change direction, or if you have a fire, or if you have a broken water main during the summer, if there's a high usage period, if we go out and flush, you will, and you'll still look at my fingers, you'll get a release of rust. And that rust is the source of the orange water you see. The second source of water in most New England, colored water in most of New England is manganese, which occurs naturally in both the groundwater and surface water. It's black. And when that, up from 1852 up until 2007, there was a modicum of manganese that came out of the raw water, went into the distribution system. We had chlorine that would combine with that and form a little black particle. Or we would combine it with an orthophosphate, and you would form, again, a black scale on the inside of pipe. Just to give you an example, this is a newer cement line pipe. You don't see any rust on the inside, never will, but there's some black on the inside of that. That's that manganese that over time, in this case, this main went in 1942, build up over time. Now, the good news is today, the way we treat the water, that doesn't go in, but there's still a lot of this in the system. When there is a sudden change in flows in the system, it can release colored water. Within people's own homes, copper pipe will get lined with the manganese. Some of the older homes still have actual internal piping that's galvanized. It's steel. And just like the cast iron, you get a buildup of rust. And so, those are potential sources of colored water. And, when, back 23 years ago when I came to work at the company, there was about 106 miles of that type of pipeline in the ground. We're down to about 46 miles of pipeline, gradually replacing it over time, about 4 miles a year right now. And so we hope to get rid of that last 46 miles over the next 10 to 12 years. But busy working at it. So, what can you do when you have colored water? First thing you need to do is call us, because we don't know whether you got colored water. When the water leaves the plant, it is crystal clear. Even when it migrates through pipe like this on a day-to-day basis, middle of the winter, flows are low, nothing comes off of that. The water that you're getting in your house should be crystal clear. Again, you get a fire, or let's think about in the summer when people start turning on their irrigation systems. The average usage coming out, or pumpage coming out of the plant during the winter months is about 8.9 million gallons a day. During the summer, we hit 26 million gallons a day. The difference, so you got 3 times as much flow, creates 3 times as much velocity, and start stripping that off. Well, one of the things that we do, every late spring, we go out at night, you'll see that we announce, and we go out, we send crews out, they open hydrants to try to flush out any loose rust, to try to flush out any loose manganese. But we depend upon gravity. When former Captain O'Brien went out there with his fire truck, they sucked the water out of the main. They would create twice the velocity. So every time there's a fire in the city, you can pretty much be assured that someplace there's going to be colored water created. Now, we go out after a fire, we typically try to remove that, but if you're drawing water at the time that he's drawing water, you're going to pull some of that colored water into your house, which is typically, if you were to call, they say, well, run your cold water for 15 minutes. And if it doesn't clear up, it means there's a problem in the street. If it clears up, it means likely you pulled some of that colored water into your house, and it's going to be gone. Also, another time you get that problem is if we have a broken water main. Water main breaks, you get a high rush of water through it, and again, it'll clean off that rust, it'll clean off that manganese. But as I mentioned, even internal to your service, if you have all copper piping all the way throughout your house, all the way into your building, There is some buildup of that manganese. You won't find any of that rust. Maybe at one point you may have pulled some rust into your service during a broken water event, and if you suddenly use, let's say, an apartment complex, the apartment finally gets filled up, and it's a Saturday morning, and everybody happens to get up. Maybe there's some event going on, or it's the Super Bowl, and everybody goes and at halftime and uses the bathroom at the same time. And so the flow is higher than it's been in a long time. And that'll clean off that, and suddenly people get a shot of colored water. So again, if as a homeowner, first of all, you want to look at, is it in my cold water and my hot water? Preferably, is it just in my cold water? Because if it's not in your cold water, it tells you it's not coming from the street. Because the water coming from the street is cold water. It means there's probably a problem with the hot water system. And typically, a lot of times, that's the fact that you may have at one point or another pulled some material like that into your hot water tank, which is a big tank, and there's no velocity, and that settles to the bottom. And it'll start to build up, and then when somebody uses water, it'll get cleaned out. If it's in your cold water, it could be coming from the street, or it could be coming from within your house. But one of the things we need people to do is to call. Then we're going to come out, and especially now and it's not unusual, especially in the north end of the city where the pipes are the oldest and we're still replacing them, that we have to go out. And in fact, we did it with Alderwoman Clee. She called. Of course, she saw me first, and I did want to wrap her upside the head and say, why did you wait so long to call? We want people to call. We went out, we flushed her service out, pulled the meter. The water was very colored coming out initially because she had a buildup of manganese. She has copper piping on the pipe. She's also tapped into a pipe like this where the tap goes in and you get a buildup of rust at the entrance. And so when she went to fill her hot tub or turn her irrigation system on, or where the location of the pipe is, summer flows came up, she was constantly getting colored water. You're right on Milk Street. Right. You are right. But so what I need you to do is I'll get your phone number, or better yet, you call our customer service. They'll send somebody out, we'll pull your meter, we'll flush your service out, ask you to go around and open some faucets and flush your system out while we're there. That should take care of the majority of your problem. Doesn't mean, again, if there's a fire, if there's a broken water main, an unusual event, there will be a time you may get colored water. It should be short. You should experience it very irregularly. Eventually that line on Milk Street is going to be cleaned in line. Sometime, again, I gave that time frame of 10 to 12 years. We're actually focusing on that right now because it appears to be a source of some individual issues, and it goes through some people's backyards and trying to get it out into the public right away. So hopefully, if not this year, the next year, we'll do that. But right now, if you're experiencing a problem on a regular basis, you shouldn't be. We need to come in and work with you, and I encourage anybody who's a private homeowner, or if you're a tenant, give us a call. Clavelli's been very good to work with. They've worked, diligently with us. We work with them, because one of the challenges is we want to make sure that the water we're delivering is clear and it looks good and it tastes good. Is that we don't own or control the piping from the street in. So we worked with Clavelli's. We evaluated their piping. They replaced a lot of the piping outside, some of which they had some old unlined cast iron. We mentioned 170 where we took out a fitting. When we first flowed the water, we could only get 10 gallons a minute. You think about sharing 10 gallons a minute amongst 24 units. They had no idea they had the problem until people started calling. We went in, worked with them. After they replaced that fitting and paid for it, you're getting north of 200 plus gallons a minute through that same service. Huge difference when you think about people sharing 10 gallons a minute, even with low flow showers. 10 low flow showers at 1.3 gallons a minute means you need 13 gallons a minute. It means that 3 people on the second floor are running around wondering where their water is. And so, something, that, again, we work. And when we come in, it may be that after we're done, you know, again, and you flush your own stuff, it may be okay. You know, hot water tanks are steel with a lining. That glass lining will crack in time, and you can get rust buildup from that. Maybe okay, it's time to replace your hot water tank. But we're there again. We want to make sure that what's coming into your house should be, again, short of a fire, short of a broken water main, should be clear, you know, 99% of the time.
That would hold true for the folks, did you say you lived on Cox Street, number
Yeah.
70? I lived at 84 for about 7 years. That was a while ago.
Can I just ask you to speak into the mic so they can hear?
Oh, sorry.
Otherwise, the transcriber is going to be like, why? And also make
Thank
sure you
Mr.
give your
Chairman.
name.
So the same would hold true for Cox Street. You know, Milk Street relative to Cox is essentially right across Manchester Street. So there may have been an issue, or might be an issue now with the main in Manchester Street feeding out towards Milk and heading up your way, up the hill and down to 70. So same situation holds true. Please call us and we'll do what we have to do as far as. Not all the time?
Can I just remind everybody, there's no microphones in the audience area. So the presentation should be generally directed towards us. Speak into the mic and make sure you give your name, because they're writing everything and they don't know whose name it is. I'm speaking to you, actually.
So we will, my suggestion is when we're done here, first of all, we'll talk with each one of you. But again, I would encourage you to call our customer service. They'll put you in contact with our distribution folks, and then they'll work out a time where they can work with you. Because again, intermittent, if you're having more than 3 or 4 incidents in a year, something is going on either in your service or in your house. Let us flush your service out. Let us pull your meter. Let us, you go inside. And again, we encourage everybody, it's the first thing the customer service people are going to say is it in both your cold and hot water? And if the answer is it's my hot water, then it's going to be, well, that means it's something inside your house. So please work at that side of things. If it's in your cold, we want to make sure that it's not coming from what we own. Again, there's that potential buildup of manganese, which we will need to come in and pull your meter and flush your service out. And while we're there, you work at flushing your internal piping out to clean that out so that you don't have that continual or intermittent problem.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I can tell your natural instinct is to talk to audience, so why not just move over to this seat? That way you can address the committee and the audience, and you won't feel like you have to turn around and stuff. We also, I don't think we got your name on the record?
Bernie Russo.
Bernie Rousseau, okay, just want to make sure that they get it in the back office. So Alderman Klee, if you want to just describe what you went through as a process?
First, I want to truly thank.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I just also want to note for the record that Alderman Linda Harriet Gathright has joined us. Please proceed.
Thank you. Penachuk was extraordinarily responsive, and I want to reiterate something that he's been saying all along, and that is to call. Call them, and they will come out. The truth is, 10 years ago is when my issue started, and that was when they did the flushing that kind of deflaked the manganese, and we started getting that. And then it was once in a while, and then it was pretty regular. I got a call and an email from a constituent that showed me a bathtub that was quite dirty. And that's when I ran into Mr. Ware and kind of cornered him and said, look at this, and by the way, it's happening to me too, so that I knew that it was. And he's right. I should have called more often than I did, and that lies on me. They did. They came out to my house. They flushed everything, and knock on wood, or anything close to it, it has been wonderful. My pressure's gone up a little bit, and the water has been very clean. And I was getting the manganese flakes. And for those who wonder what it is, I used to think it was like having mascara in my water. If you were to touch it, it would leave a black smear wherever it was, whether it was in your bathtub or in your sink. We had it with both cold and hot water. That told me that it was in my hot water tank. So we flushed our hot water tank. I've been cautious telling people to flush their hot water tank because it should be done in a very precise way, like shut off the burner, so that you don't burn out and you don't create a fire. So if you don't know how to do it properly, ask someone and they can help you. as I said, they came out and they did mine regularly. I am your neighbor. I live on Maywood Drive, so I'm just one street down from Milk Street. And when it happens to my house, it happens to neighbors. It's hard to get people to call. They think that Pennachuck is just going to try to make excuses. They don't make excuses. They come out, they will take your name. They have a great recording system. So now they can see if there's a cluster. And that's why it's important for us to call. They can't track, they can't fix if they don't know what's going on. For those in apartments, I understand that you have anxiety. And I have a few people that are having anxiety from Lillian's, from Clovelly's, that they will get in trouble. I don't believe that's the case. I think from what you've been doing, you've been very responsive. You do still have one person, and I spoke to Mr. Ware about it, in 160 that is saying that she's still having brown water. It, I believe she told me the last time it happened was around New Year's Eve kind of area, Christmas Day and Christmas Eve, which would be more calls for water. So that may be when it's happening. Yeah, so that may be when it's happening when they're called. Now, I don't know if that's too,
So one of the things we like to tell them, we don't get a lot of, complexes, so we can. All your cold water, not your hot water, because we don't want to pull the colored water into the hot water. Turn on cold water, all the sinks inside, maybe flush your toilet to create as high a flow as
Yeah,
possible.
excuse me, I've never heard that kind of resonance before.
we're going to keep moving around.
This way.
You are now Attorney Bolton. If you'd like to be mayor, I'm sure his work's
We can
amazing.
make you the mayor for a
Totally your call.
Please, this
I
is-
heard that and I was like, I've never heard a microphone do that before. Maybe, it
So-
might be magnetes in the microphone.
So, we encourage, and in fact, one of the things that's, kind of come out is, we're actually going to send a letter to the various large apartment complexes and say, if you've been experiencing problems, work with us so we can help you get your pipes flushed out, get those higher velocities, get rid of those intermittent incidences of colored water within your own complex. It'll take some work. But again, we'll, like I said, we'll come out there, we'll make sure that, all the water that's used during that flushing, you're not gonna be billed for it, it's not gonna show up in your sewer bill either. And, help you do what we do in the streets every year, but do it inside your apartment complex to try to get, to a point where that's happening.
So I just want to make an observation. I think your voice is actually so well projecting, it's being picked up on multiple mics. So you might want to just sit down and talk to just the one mic. Because I have very acute hearing since I'm blind as a bat and I can hear it happening again. But thank you for the information. It's definitely very
We're
helpful.
making him sit down now.
You are correct. That's never happened before. Both of those microphones are having problems.
So it's not just his amazing speaking voice.
I don't need a microphone.
Well, excuse me for the transcription.
You do.
I mean, you want to try being mayor or?
If you could maybe just slide up a couple of microphones, that would really be helpful.
Oh, over
do
to-
not cover
I would just turn this one off.
They don't turn on,
Oh, they
but you can
don't.
turn it away. There you
Yeah,
go.
I would just,
That
I'd
might
just
do
be the
it.
mayor.
Can you start over, Don?
From the beginning.
What is a pipe? Explain. No, I think you've done a really good job of presenting what Pennachuck does, and we are all certainly under the impression that if a constituent or a landlord has an issue, the first step they should need to take is to talk to Pennachuck. I think there was some confusion as to whether an individual in an apartment complex should make that call or whether it should be the complex owner. Do you want to elaborate a little, Bernie?
Don, should,
Don?
We would encourage, again, if it's in the cold water,
Don, you're going to have to move. It's
Yeah, you
definitely
get
the
it.
microphone.
give us a call
Don, just become
He
the
wants
mayor.
you to
There's
move.
no other way around. It's time to step
So
up.
you have to
Be the
move up
mayor,
to
be
either
the
the mayor
president.
or you become the president of the.
You got a stool. There you go.
He just has a great voice. It projects wonderfully.
we ought to do this for meetings.
It does. So we
Thank you
would
for being a
want,
good sport here.
because as Patricia indicated when somebody calls our customer service, it gets logged as a colored water complaint. That then in turn maps over to our GIS system. And we have a portal where we can look at where all the colored water complaints are. So, you look for clusters, but again, it's amazing how patient people can be. They don't call. Sometimes I hate to use it, it's an easy answer. So we had a big broken water main on Kinsley Street back a couple months ago, and that created colored water all the way back, especially up towards the hospital and exit 5 because of the way the water flowed. So people were calling in and said, all right, we have a broken water main, try to limit your use of water, especially hot water. And, well, this main will be fixed at 8 o'clock at night, tomorrow morning when you get up, run your cold water for 5 to 10 minutes. If it hasn't cleared, give us a call back. We didn't get any calls back. We probably got 35 calls that day relative to we got colored water up here, but we knew what the cause of it was. The fire department may call, the morning after fire and say, we use this hydrant. We can pretty much project, dependent upon the area of the city, we're going to get calls with people with colored water. We try to get out in advance of that, but by the time we know that, people have gotten up, taken their morning showers and whatnot. But we'll get out there, we run our hydrants slowly to clear that colored water that's been stirred up, that iron maybe that's been sitting at the bottom of the main, or the manganese that got broken off of the main itself, and clear that out. But call. And also you should call, so we'll look at it, we'll log that, if it's in the cold water and we only hear from one person in a 24-unit building, we'll typically say it sounds like it's an internal problem. We've only, we'll follow up. We've only heard from one person. Have you called your management company? And again, the management companies typically, but we like it when a tenant calls, we attach that to the account owned by the management company, so we can look at and track, did we get one call from that 24-unit building, or did we get 5? There's a big difference. 5 would indicate that there's problem, that it's related to something that may have happened in the distribution system, either out in the street or the piping within the apartment itself. But again, we want to work in that case with the apartment owner to make sure that at the end of the day, the water's clear. Did something unique go on? So we would encourage even the tenants to call.
One thing
So that would just help in terms of the investigation of it. So I think that's a takeaway, is that it doesn't have to be like looked at in terms of, well, I shouldn't call because I'm not the owner. Penachuk needs to know so that they can start tracking the nature of a problem. Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. And I agree. If there is a problem, they should call. So if you can indulge me with 2 questions.
Sure.
And the first one is the most important. The number 2 call is?
The
What
number,
is the customer service if they do have a problem with their water system?
so they would call our customer service. If we determine it's an external problem, then we will connect that customer up with our distribution department.
Okay. Do you happen to know offhand, sir, the number, customer
So our
service?
customer service number would be 882-5191. There's also an 800 number, but nobody in Nashua needs that in order to make a toll-free call.
That would be
Could-
the 882-5191 chief would be the best number to call.
So it's 882
5191.
5191.
Correct.
And perhaps maybe the chair we might be able to put that up on the Channel 16 to help you to get the information out on that.
That would
And I'm
be
sure I
great.
see our friends from the Telegraph are here. But if the chairman will indulge me with my second question. We discussed manganese and rust in the water, and that's understandable. But I think the people at home that have experienced this really would like to know, is the water still potable?
All right, so there are iron and manganese currently have no standard from a drinking water or safety perspective. They do from an aesthetic perspective. So when you see that color, it's well over the aesthetic limits, which means that your water is going to taste horrible, and it's going to look horrible, and it's not going to, you certainly don't want to take a bath in it. if somebody takes a drink of it, it's not going to be harmful. It's not going to be very tasty, though.
So your tea will taste terrible.
Yes.
Or use Xerox. They still make Xerox? I don't know.
Seen that in a
If
while.
I
not know what
may,
that is,
I
so-
will also add that beyond the aesthetics of the color of the water, we also sense that there's an odor to it.
Sir, you're gonna have to give your name and number again. This is, or
this is-
name and address. This is not the public comment period, but make your comments briefly, please.
Yeah, my name is Dimitrios Mena, 29 Milk Street in Nashua. The water that we get is brown. Sometimes it persists for a couple of hours, but then eventually it clears up, and it is in fact the cold water, yes. But also we detected a smell from my old chemistry days. I think it's like methane, something like that. And that's what makes it a little more fearful for us.
Iron, sir, will definitely impart a greater odor than manganese. So if the water is brown, I would suspect that it would be an elevated level of insoluble iron, and I would expect that you would pick up an odor. Not necessarily methane, I haven't heard that before, or nothing as pungent as, say, hydrogen sulfide gas, which has a rotten egg odor, but insoluble iron will impart an odor, and you would pick that up.
Thank you for sharing. So there are definitely some commonalities, and for these to be so familiar, it means they do happen on a pretty regular basis, but there is knowledge and a procedure for it, and they don't necessarily represent a health risk, is my understanding.
That's correct.
I did reach out to our own health department. Their assessment was that there was no health concerns at this time, and they were out of the city tonight, so they're not concerned either with the specific situations that were brought. But again, I think a good step if you're concerned about your water's potability or safety is to immediately call Penachuk and let them know something's going on so they can investigate. Alderman Clee?
Yeah, I'd just like to make one more comment. One of the things from a personal point that when we experienced some of the manganese and so on was the little filter on your faucets.
The strainer, yes.
The strainers, they would fill up with these little particles. So sometimes you'll notice that your faucets aren't coming as, so we had to take it off and just clean it. So sometimes it's those little things. But if you are finding those particles, you really should be calling Penachuk, and I can't reiterate that enough. Call Penachuk, speak to them about it. If you want to, change those little screens on your, I don't know how the complex feels about you doing it when you're a tenant, but for personal homeowners, that's one of the things that I would say. And again, we lived with it for way too long, and it did come and go, and I laughed about it. I adjusted my life. I knew that if we were running a lot of water, I didn't do laundry, because otherwise my whites were orange. So we had rust and so on.
So
and
do not adjust your life.
do
We
not adjust
we
your
do not
life.
love that
Do
dirty
not
water.
do not
Just
use
call
me as an
Penachuk.
example. Do exactly what they're telling you to do. Call. So.
Okay. And I know it was also commented that infrastructure is a concern. Sir, would you mind waiting until the end, and then just make public comment? You'll also have an opportunity to speak to Penachuk right afterwards. But infrastructure is an element as well, and Penachuk is working on updating that as well. We have some 100-plus-year-old pipes.
That's correct. And Don is our chief operating officer, as you know, and was our chief engineer for a number of years, is very familiar with the footage of pipe in Nashua, the pipe that has to be replaced and the pipe that has been replaced. And what is it, about 40-something miles?
Yeah,
Don?
over the last 23 years, we've replaced just a little over 60 miles of the 106 miles of unlined cast iron water main that's there. And, we're currently replacing at a rate of about 4 miles a year. And people say, well, why don't you just replace it all tomorrow? It's
Dig up every
about
road.
1.5 million miles a mile to replace. So about $6 million a year is invested in replacing that water main. That has an impact on what people pay. But again, that water main still is sound. And if it's, shouldn't yield colored water a lot of times. There are areas where, again, you may see, due to the nature or location of the pipe, that we need to get to it earlier rather than later. Part of the planning process is looking at where we're getting those clusters of calls. So when nobody calls, I'm sorry, well, the water that leaves the plant is crystal clear. Couldn't be any clearer. You could look down through 30 feet of it. I can look in the clear hole and see just to the bottom, just as clear as can be. That's why we need people to call.
And
You
for
know.
the folks that are concerned, Mr. Chairman, about the 40 or so miles of pipe that are left, please know that in our treatment process, we make adjustments to water quality, pH, and some chemistry additions to slow down. It will never eliminate it completely, but it will drastically and nearly eliminate this tuberculation that you see in the line. Those nodules that you see in the unlined cast are known as tubercles, and that's what plugs the line. By adjusting the pH and adding some treatment process, that nearly eliminates that until we get there and get that other 40 miles out.
So practices that we didn't know about in the past still have an impact today, but we've refined the process greatly, and new plumbing and new piping don't have the same susceptibility?
That's correct, because Don talked about the fact that it was unlined cast. Now we have a different type of piping product. We use cement-lined ductile iron pipe, or we use plastic.
But
which
no
is
matter
what-
what we do, Mike could be putting out a fire and just ruin everything.
That's correct, because you do have a lining of iron and manganese, primarily manganese, even in this cement line pipe. Because even though iron and manganese is a naturally occurring, I don't want to call it a contaminant, but a naturally occurring mineral in New England's water, it's soft, corrosive water. You're correct. You're still going to have that lining, that potential lining in a new main. And if National Fire and Rescue come along and change the velocity in that main, or there's a break, you're going to get a scouring effect and potentially pick it up in the home.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and the fire department is very good for many reasons, and one in particular in the winter, we do report the hydrant usage because they have to come to check to make sure the hydrant does not freeze.
Correct.
I have to say, we have a very good operating system with the hydrants. Very rarely do we have a frozen hydrant. Due diligence that they do come out to check that the hydrant is draining and they're ready for the next fire, which is keenly important. But you got to remember, we're purchasing trucks that have the capability of pumping over 2,000 gallons a minute. And if you look at a fire in a prolonged time, that's an awful lot of water that's moving at a fast speed. And this is what, knocks off some of the tuberculation. And it's understandable how it happens. These things are pumping beasts, and the trucks are, and they
I
work
don't think
quite
any
well.
neighbors are going to stop you and be like, wait. You're messing up my shower over here. You guys do what you need to do, and then just let the neighborhood know afterwards.
But it does, unfortunately, it's one of those things that happen. But the fortunate thing is that it does seem, and I'm sure Mr. Russo would agree, as Mr. Ware, it is temporary. After the fire's out, the system goes back to what they call a normal operating pressure, and it seems to stabilize itself at that time.
Okay, are there any questions from other members of the committee? All right, well, I would like to thank Penachuk for coming and presenting in such detail. I would like to thank Alderwoman Klee for all the work she's done on resolving the specific issues that were brought here. And I would like to thank members of the community for coming out to provide insight. As Penachuk says, if they're aware of the problems and they can treat them. Likewise with the Board of Aldermen, each one of you has a local alderman who represents you. And if we're aware of issues, whether it's just not being sure of who to talk to or where to go if something happens with your quality of life, or if it's a larger issue where you are taking the steps and you're not seeing a result, it's just good to know your alderman and make sure that you're working with them so that we can address it on behalf of the city. So I guess that's it for our discussion of the dirty water episode. We have another period for public comment unless any board members have another issue they'd like to bring up for discussion.
I would just
Alderman
like to
Klee.
reiterate my thanks to Penachuk for everything that they've been doing. They've been very tolerant of my continual emails and my questions, and they've been great. Thank you.
So now if anyone would like to make public comment, feel free to step up to the mic. Remember to say your name and your address, even if you said it before, just because the transcriber has to write it again. So you're saving them from having to look up what they just wrote.
Again, Laura Palmer from 160 Concord Street. Thank you guys from Pennachuck for being here, specifically, and for all of you for being here. It's very important. My particular questions right now are just for my fellow members of the community, some that are here and some that are, many that are not. Water's kind of a big deal. So, just a point of clarification to Pennachuck. There was some reference to some letters that were going to be sent out. Are they going to all members of communities? So, for example, someone like myself who is a renter, will I be getting that, or will the property management company be getting that letter?
Oh, no. Okay, so public comment is meant to be unidirectional, so maybe phrase them rhetorically in the future, but, okay, who knew? I mean.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So the letter will be going out, so a couple things. We send out a newsletter which goes out and gets posted on our website. That will go out this spring, but with the letters I was talking about specifically will be going to the owners of apartments.
Not homeowners? Is there a reason why homeowners wouldn't?
Well,
be
so
privy
it's-
to it? Obviously affecting local
Right.
homeowners.
So like I
as
said, there'll
well.
be a newsletter that goes out, that we usually do on either a quarterly or semi-annual letter talking about this, and again, reminding people, kind of again, process, how it occurs, what they should do, and then after they've run that cold water and they still have colored water, to give us a call.
Okay.
Additionally, I would also point out that this is televised, so this will help a little bit. And then our friend at the Telegraph over there is right in the back, so he's covering all this. So I'm sure we can make sure that he puts whatever needs to be put into the paper.
Thank you, everyone, sincerely. So I'm sorry, sir, I didn't catch your name and I don't want to get it wrong.
Bernie Russo.
I'm sorry, supposed to be directed in general. I'm still learning.
Rhetorical.
And I'm learning. Rhetorical question, but not really. So if I understand correctly, based on the mileage of pipes that you spoke to earlier, it sounds like you had alluded to 10 to 12 years-ish before everything will be replaced.
That's
In North
about the
End.
target.
That's a really long time for people to continue to have to deal with issues like that. That's a lot of expenses. That's, I know, another topic. But on a personal note, as someone that lives close to the source, being Pennachuck Water Works initially, I did have my water tested, but if one thing that you did speak to, sir, was pH levels. And I don't know exactly what you treat with and what for. That's not my field, obviously. But I do know that my pH was on the higher side, and I'm concerned, if my water's safe now, further on, as you continue with this process, do I need to be concerned that my water is going to continue to be safe? Are you going to be adding more chemicals as people report more problems?
No, we shouldn't have to. As Don mentioned, if you or other individuals were to call, the process that we would undertake to take care of your problem would be purely physical. In other words, we'd go in, remove the meter, and flush it. But we wouldn't make any chemical additions, nor would we make any chemical adjustments as we replace those water mains. What we do is we have a fairly precise pH range that we like to operate in. We use a product called sodium hydroxide to accomplish that. We used to use lime years ago, and now we use sodium hydroxide, and that gets the pH to where we want to be, primarily for corrosion inhibition.
Okay.
Yep.
I believe that was it.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Again, typically it's supposed to be public comment, but those are really good questions and none of us thought to ask them. So, I mean, now the public knows. So thank you for your time. Would anyone else like to make public comment? Okay. Do we have any announcements or remarks by the alderman? Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say, as a former member of this committee, I'd like to compliment you for bringing this discussion up tonight, because this was really what we intended this committee to do. And with social media, that was the other thing that Alderman Clea and I, I'm sure several other aldermen here have seen on this, and this is a good way to tackle the problem. And even coming from, we are Greater Boston, and we love our dirty water.
Yeah.
We just, we really don't want to
They
drink
can
it.
have their dirty
So I
water.
would like to thank Pennachuck for their, very frank discussion coming here and, getting the proper information out. And my final to basically say is, I would like to repeat the number, and the customer service number is 882-5191. That is very important if we're going to solve this issue. They need to identify the problem in order to solve it. It's the main thing I'm taking away from this evening. So again, I'll repeat it again, 882-5191, and they'll get you hold of customer service at the Pennachuck, and hopefully we can get this, no pun intended, but cleaned up, so there you
Yeah.
go.
And Chief, that's 24-hour availability.
Very
7
good,
day
thank
week.
you.
Yep.
So Nashua means beautiful river with a pebbly bottom, not dirty water, so we would prefer it to be clean here. Were there any other remarks by members of the Alderman? Oh, Alderman Harriet Gathright.
First of all, I apologize for being late. Had some family issues, and I thank my colleague for filling in with me as well. But I do have a question. If you call because you think there's a water issue and Pennachuck comes out, but you determine that it's not Pennachuck's issue, is the tenant or the person that owned the home charged for that visit?
No.
Easy
Well,
answer.
thank you.
I'll take it.
Very easy answer, yeah. And I think that people don't always realize that, because I did have a problem, and it took me months before I called. And it wasn't my problem. It was a problem. They changed my meter and everything, and the noise went away. So I think people wonder, especially if you're a homeowner, am I going to be charged?
I agree, and that's
So-
part of why we wanted to have this meeting here and make sure
Yeah.
people understood.
So thank you.
Are there any other remarks? Alderman Clee, Alderman Laws? All right, if I can get a motion to adjourn?
Motion made, if I may.
You may not.
I will.
Okay. All right, then we are adjourned at 7:55. Thank you, everybody.